Welcome back, my reading friends. My name is Eddy Hood, and I am so excited that you're here because I'm starting something new today, and I think this will create a greater sense of community in the reading world here at YouTube. I'm hoping so, anyway. I started hosting a book club online several months ago, and what I thought I would do is every time we switch books, we move into a new book, I thought I would record that book club discussion and post it here for you. That way, you can decide if you would like to join or not. It'll give you a sense of what we talk about, the way the discussions go, the kind of people that are attending, and I really want to make sure that you feel comfortable there and a part of it. So if you do want to join book club, go to highlightish.com and then just click on book club up in the navigation, and I'll also link it down below in the show notes here. But it's just $4.99 a month, and we would love to have you. Anyway, we are talking about Great Expectations by Charles Dickens this month, and it's November 2023 at the time of filming. It's such a fantastic book in terms of character development and social mobility, and really reading and sort of cheering on for this main character named Pip, hoping that he will find his way in life and come out stronger in the end despite all the hardships that he goes through. So let's follow along and let's jump into this week's discussion of Great Expectations. Book. Nobody's ever heard of it before, right? Actually, it's one of the greatest novels ever written, and it's Charles Dickens. And so we're going to take a little bit of time and go through our first week's reading. So we're reading about 10 pages a day. It's pretty slow pace for this book. It reads pretty quick. But that means we started at page 0 and we're on page 70 by tonight. So I'm just curious. You can chat me in the chat here, or you can let me know. But for anybody watching, we're gonna start a new practice here where every time we start a new book, we're going to record the first group meeting and post it on the socials so that other people who aren't in the book club can see what it's like to be here, and that will help you decide whether you want to join or not. But if you do, just go to highlightish.com. Think of highlighting a book. So highlight, add ISH at the end, highlightish.com, and then up in the navigation it says book club. You click on that. It's $4.99 a month. And you get to join this illustrious group of incredible people. Honestly, I just love these people. They're the best. So out of curiosity, either by hands or by chat, how are you all liking Great Expectations so far? How's it going for you? Good? All right. Carol likes it. Carol, you've already read it, so you know what you're getting into with this, right? Steve, what are you thinking about this book so far, brother?
I'm really enjoying it. I really am. It's a book that I've always wanted to read. I was part of a book club last year that was just going to read Dickens, and I could not get to this book. And so I'm so happy finally reading it.
Good. I love it. Good. All right. What do you think, Tracy? How's it going for you so far?
It hasn't grabbed me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm right at 70, 75 pages.
Mm-hmm.
It reads fast.
It does.
But so far, I'm not really compelled. And I'm not super attached to any of the characters.
Interesting. Maybe tonight's discussion will change that a little bit for you. Maybe it will dissuade you even more. We'll see. Okay. Does anybody feel good, bad, or otherwise on this book before we get in? Okay, cool. Well, this software, for whatever reason, is not letting me update the agenda. So we're not going to rely on the agenda tool here tonight because it's got a bug in it or something. I don't know. However, I did post the agenda on our Facebook page today, so I'm going to be reading the questions off of that. There's 12 questions tonight. And this is our first time in this season's book club where we're reading some fiction, right? So the conversation's a little different. Usually I share a highlight out of the book that we're reading. We pull that up and highlight it, or whatever, and go through our book notes together. But our conversations will be more character-focused, plot-focused. And remember, when we're reading fiction, there's still very much something to learn. A lot of people think, I'm going to go to nonfiction to learn something. I'm going to go to fiction to be entertained. But what we can learn from fiction is something called empathy. There's emotional intelligence and empathy. So when you are reading about characters in different situations than yours, it's always an interesting practice to try and put yourself in that person's shoes. So let's do that tonight. So the first question I have for everybody is in the very beginning of the book, where it starts off with Pip, who's our main character here, and he's about 7 or 8 years old in the beginning of the story, and he's in a churchyard, and he's looking at these tombstones of his parents. So if you have not read this book, there will be some spoilers in these conversations, so make your decisions wisely if you want to watch this or not. But these tombstones, he's using them to construct an idea of his parents who've died, right? So he's trying to understand who they are, and he is looking at the shape of the letters, and he's looking at the different fonts, and he's using that information to construct a mental image of his parents. And this gives us a really interesting sense of the 7-year-old who has a lot of imagination and a lot of self-awareness for a child. I'm just curious, why do you think that's so important for Dickens to start showing us this side of Pip immediately?
Well, I don't know if it's going to go this route, but some thoughts that I had are his own expectations of how he's going to carve his own path. We'll see if that's what happens, but yeah, right now it seems like it's kind of opening up, and not only is it introducing us to him, but he's probably seeming like he's in this survival mode, but looking back into his past a bit, and we'll see, projecting into the future, how he's going to carve his own path.
Yeah. Well, you used a word too, right? We're going to see what his expectations are. And I think there's a connection to the title, Great Expectations, and the path that he's going to take, right? Because Pip is very poor, and he's without his parents at a young age. And he has some expectations, or he will, and other people have expectations for him as well. And we're going to see him kind of move through society, going from the lowest to the low to the highest to the high, and how he handles those expectations. That's why this is an interesting book to read, because I think we all have our own relationship with our level of popularity, our reputation, our financial position, our status in our circles. And so even though Pip is a small boy, you can still put yourself in his shoes and say, how would I respond if I were given these opportunities that he's been given? But I think it's interesting that Pip is so self-aware at 7. I think that says something about who he's going to be. Any other thoughts here? I mean, we also see 5 little stones right next to his parents. These 5 stones are representative of his 5 brothers that have died. So you've got a 7-year-old boy, no parents, 5 dead brothers. He's only got 1 surviving relative, which is his sister. How do we all feel about his sister? Tracy, how you feeling about this Miss Jo?
She's pretty harsh.
Yeah.
So, I've read a lot of different things where, in the time frame it's set in, that the whoever's raising the child is incredibly strict. Corporal punishment is totally normal. But we get the picture of her also as basically beating her husband.
Yeah, she's beating up Jo. Yeah.
So, this is like a very different gender role for what I would have considered at the time. And it kind of made me see a different bond between Jo and Pip. I could kind of also get mad at Jo. He's a grown man. Like, why are you letting this woman abuse this child? Especially when we know that Jo was abused himself.
Yeah. And Jo loves Pip, right? Very much. But Jo's also a bit of a child. I almost wonder if, like, Jo's level of, clearly he's not educated because he can't read. He's learned to work with his hands, and he's learned to trade. I almost feel like Jo was raised somewhat the same way that Pip was, and he's become super submissive because of it. Uneducated, poor, probably told he's not worth much. And now that's carrying on, and it's just normal fare for him, because that's all he knows. I don't think he's really been through a kind of life where he is allowed to have a spine. It's just always been taken away from him,
But I found it was interesting that he doesn't replicate the abuse he saw in his home. In fact, he goes the opposite way and just accepts.
Yeah.
But the fact that the sister is kind of such a wretched character does add that much more to the relationship between Joe and Pip. They're like the only stable force in each other's life.
Do any of you feel, it's almost weird, do any of you feel safer when Pip is with Joe? Do you feel like in your heart, you're like, oh, okay, we're going to rest for a minute here, right? That's one of the things I love about Dickens is he's known for his ability to create really memorable, really strong characters. And whether the plot is gripping you or not, I would say that these characters are going to be pretty memorable. I mean, he's created Miss Havisham, who is one of the most remembered characters of all time, you know, Scrooge and all these other people. He's like this really great character writer. And I think you're going to fall in love with Pip as you go through his highs and lows in life, because you love people when you experience hardship with them. And Pip is going to experience lots of hardship. And we're seeing that in the beginning, right? Dickens is doing a really good job of setting up what it feels like to be Pip. And so in every sense of the word, he's lonely. You know, nobody loves him except Joe. He's constantly beat. He's constantly made fun of. His parents are dead. His siblings are dead. He lives in the marshes of all places. I mean, we're talking like horrible living conditions. Also, have you noticed what Dickens did with the weather? Like, what time of year is this? Is that adding to the loneliness? Yeah.
A couple things that I'm imagining are probably going to be foreshadowing. I'm reminded of like Shakespeare doing stuff with the weather, and perhaps later in the story, some of the weather will change as the story evolves. I don't know, but I assume that might. And also about the mom, the sister as the maternal figure in the house, but not just a disciplinarian, but it reminded me of like the children's book that my daughter's reading that I loved as a kid, Matilda from Roald Dahl, like Miss Trunchbull, like these villainous folks who in a young child's life, rather than having an endearing, loving figure, it's this woman who's constantly reminding him of how much of a hassle he is for her to supposedly care for.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah. No, I love it. Any other thoughts here? I also like how Dickens is making this Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, these opening scenes, because that's supposed to be like the greatest time of the year, family and warmth and joy. And and it's like the most magical year of life, that 7-8-year-old life, with Christmas. And you're experiencing it through the eyes of this little boy who's experiencing all of the wrong emotions on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So I think that makes it kind of drives home his loneliness even more. Okay, well, let's go into the next question here. So I wrote, all right, so Pip meets this really nasty convict out in the marshes, right, when he's at the churchyard. And this convict is somewhat terrifying. I love how Dickens describes this guy, because I almost feel like you can see this just ragged, old, horrible guy who's got iron, latched to his leg, and is telling this little boy all of these horrible lies about how he's going to rip his heart out and his liver out and everything else. But the question was, there's a point where Pip says that he was a small bundle of shivers, afraid of it all. And he's not just talking about this guy, right? He's not just talking about the horrible person here and his potential companion that's going to be hunting him if he doesn't do what he's told. But Pip's referencing the greater world. He's referencing society and his family and everything. He's afraid of it all. I'm just curious how that makes you feel, or what your thoughts are here.
Dickens is painting such a bleak picture.
Mhm.
Like nothing works for this in this child's favor.
Mm-mm.
Like no family, not even a memory of his parents. He's basically one in a long line of people whose lives ended way too soon. There's a comment when he's describing those headstones about how they checked out so early that they didn't even have strife.
Right.
Everything is a struggle. He has no real reason to stay alive other than that's all he knows to do.
Yeah.
And there's this play on it starting out so bleak with a title of Great Expectations. Where is this child who sees nothing but stuff to be afraid of going to suddenly develop the capacity to imagine he can pull himself out of this and into something great?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. What are his expectations for himself right now? Does he have any expectations? Because this horrible person, this horrible convict, has asked him to steal a file and some whittles or food, right? How, with the amount of self-awareness that Pip has, how is he responding to this quest he's been given? Like internally, what's his struggle?
I don't.
Well,
Maybe. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Oh no, go ahead, Ted. Go ahead.
You're up, Steve. Go ahead.
I was gonna reference. I believe it was in chapter 6. It was just a very profound snapshot, I think, into Pip's state of mind at the time. The idea that he was cowardly and doing something that he knew was right, in as much as he was cowardly and avoiding something that he knew was wrong. And I thought it just went. I mean, it was just a very profound statement. I actually wrote it down and journaled about it today because it was just a very good, I thought it was a very good indication as to where he's at and how he feels about what he's experiencing.
Yep.
And he also does mention that he's not worried at all about how his sister perceives him, but how Joe would perceive him.
Yeah.
If he were found out that he was lying and stealing. And so it just, I think it goes to his frame of mind that he's in a sense knows that he's acting cowardly in this situation.
Yeah, I love it. I actually wrote that line down. It was, I was too cowardly to do what I knew to be right, and I had been too cowardly to avoid doing what I knew to be wrong. I love that because this kid is wicked, right?
That was beautifully written.
Yeah, we all caught that passage. That was very good. And I think the reason why I liked it so much is because I've been there myself. I have been too cowardly to do the right thing, and then the vice versa as well. And so you're just stuck. Tad,
yeah. There's a line. There's a couple lines where he's talking about, and I don't know if we're jumping ahead, but I almost read it backwards. And I loved a line that's maybe touching on what you guys are saying. There's one where he's saying, like, hey, maybe I would have sought sanctuary in a church. He's saying, under the weight of my wicked secret, I pondered whether the church would be powerful enough to shield me from the vengeance of that terrible young man if I divulged to that establishment. Like, should I run to the church? But the sentence right before that, I couldn't get that one out of my head. It's like he's saying how his heart, he knows in his heart what his hands did was bad. Like the terrors that had assailed me whenever Mrs. Joe had gone near the pantry or out of the room were only to be equaled by the remorse with which my mind dwelt on what my hands had done. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's really good. And I think it's good because, I mean, I've stolen lots of things as a little kid. I took all sorts of things. And in that moment, like, I don't know, I could feel all of those things. And I wasn't even doing it for a righteous reason. I wasn't even helping people. I was just taking things, Anyway, any other thoughts on this? Pip's conflict about having to steal some food in a file?
I felt all that, but I also felt like there was no other choice he could have made with the situation he had in his life.
Yeah.
And that sleepless night, I could just feel that and almost had a maternal feeling towards Pip at this point. But I really don't feel like he could have done anything different.
Yeah, I agree. Well, there's a line in here that says, see, I wrote it down. Let's see, where's it at? Okay. I can't remember. We'll get to it in a minute. But the idea that because we know, what do we know about the narrator of this book? Pip is narrating the book, right? It's in first person, but it's past tense. So we know that we're hearing from Pip in the future, right? An older version of Pip. And he's talking about this experience he had as a kid. And you can tell that too, because there are words that he uses in the narration that are far more complex than Pip of childhood would be able to use. So we know from that, like I wrote down, he used the word sagacious and a few others. That is that's telling us something about the education he's had as he's grown up, and also the kind of person he's become. He's been through a lot. He's expanded his vocabulary. But the narrator mentions, now that he's much older, that children have I can't remember what he wrote, like a terror in their heart, and they're not willing to divulge that. But if they did, the things we would learn as adults from the kids if they didn't feel scared to share what was actually happening out there in the world. Did you guys catch that comment? I want to try and find out my notes.
I think you have it in question 5, right?
5?
Is that what you're?
There it is. Yeah. So I wrote, the view of the narrator shows that Pip is older now and he's telling us of his childhood. Why does he mention the secrecy of terror in children? That's it. Thanks, Carol. Yeah, he uses the word secrecy of terror. Kids hold on to their secrets because they're scared of telling people they love, like Joe, because they don't want to lose Joe's favor. They're scared of telling people like Mrs. Joe because she'll beat the crud out of them. Right. So what does a child do? Right. And I thought, as a parent, I thought that was really insightful. Like, how do you give your kid a safe space to talk about their secrets?
Yeah, and I think I believe it was after the convicts were apprehended and I believe it was Joe that, in essence, said that even though they were convicts, they still deserved some level of and of just being treated as humans. That they're all humans, regardless of what's happened to them. And I think, in a sense, it kind of gave Pip a little bit of reassurance that he maybe did the right thing, even though it was deceitful and he did steal. But I think it gave him some reassurance that deep down inside, maybe he did the right thing by offering him food and the stuff that he needed.
Yeah, it's good. I also like how I feel like Dickens did a good job, much better writer than I am, of properly nailing what a child feels when they do something like this. Because it just reminds me of what it was like being a kid for myself. I grew up in some conflicted spaces. My mother was great, but I had some interesting family experiences that I was exposed to that also created terror in my heart, and things that my mom couldn't protect me from. So I feel like he nailed that. It's interesting. But okay, any other thoughts before we go on? All right, this is good. So there is this image of the hulks. The hulks are these big prison ships sitting out in the bay, right? And they're waiting to take these convicts back into custody. I loved how Dickens described the hulks. It was a very sort of piratey feeling in my head. These big, like, black ships with chained down, like heavy chains. There's a point in there where he said that the ships seemed almost more manacled than the prisoners themselves, and it created this really eerie feeling as a reader for me. But I also tried to see those ships through the eyes of an 8-year-old, 7-year-old who thinks that because he's stolen a file, he's going to go to the hulks now. What did you all feel when you read about the hulks? Do you have any thoughts about those?
I thought it was really interesting that when he was describing the hulks, and leaving the area where the convict was, he talked about the navigation tower, like for the ships at sea, and how stark and ugly it is. And like just the word Hulk, right? It's like something looming over, like it's almost evil.
Mm-hmm. I love
that these two people escaped from it, and the way that the convict is described, the escapee, it's I don't know, it's like this feeling of like oppression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I hadn't thought about the actual power of the word Hulk, but you're right. It feels like something sitting on your shoulders, like a big shadow. And I also wonder if there's like a bit of a metaphorical meaning there, the image of this ship and being chained up, and sort of the thoughts he feels as a child about doing right and wrong. Makes me think, I can't remember who it was last week was talking about the cargo ships that were shuttling the prisoners to Auschwitz and other concentration camps last week. If y'all remember that, people were talking. Do you remember who it was talking about them being packed in? Oh, it was Kristen, because she was a teacher, I think. Yeah, and she was talking about that really powerful image. I kind of felt like the Hulks felt like that a little bit, just a ship version. All right, doing good. So let's see here. Oh, okay. So the sixth note I had, which is on our Facebook page, I wrote, in inviting the guests into the home for Christmas dinner, Pip opened the front door to the company, making believe that it was a habit of ours to open that door. What is it like being Pip at the Christmas dinner table while all the adults are speaking poorly about him and how ungrateful he is as a burden? Why does Joe keep giving him gravy in between each stabbing remark? So I liked this scene a lot because I've been to a lot of different Christmas dinners, and family is wonderful, but I always feel like there's like an underlying political thing happening at every family table, at least the tables I've been to. Some sibling rivalry happening, there's some competition happening, there's whatever. So I thought that was interesting. But first of all, I loved how they never used this front door, and so he had to pretend that this is what we do all of the time. Do you ever feel that way when you're hosting? Like you get your house all done up just right, and you pretend that you got your crap together when really, you don't got your crap together. We're just make-believing here. Any thoughts on this?
It was super relatable. I mean, who doesn't have like the door for family and the door for everybody else, and the front parlor that's really, reserved, the furniture that certain people are not allowed to sit on, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it also reminded me of some of the things like clinically that we know about abusers. Oh. That in front of other people, Mrs. Joe is a very different person.
Yeah.
Mrs. Joe is this martyr who, maybe even married beneath her and, has taken on this terrible burden of raising this child. And yeah, behind closed doors, Pip is not safe.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought about that. There's definitely a facade that they're putting on. I also like how it's setting up the importance of their position in society and how they value keeping up with the Joneses, per se, or trying to, because this ultimately is a book about, raising yourself in the ranks, sort of thing. And I love how Dickens is like setting the foundation of like, we're super poor, we're miserable, but we're going to pretend like we're doing great here. And clearly Miss Joe really cares about being seen as a little more of a high society, got her stuff together lady when Uncle Pumberchook's around and a few other people. Any other thoughts about opening the door and pretending? What about Pip sitting at the table now? And not only is Miss Joe mistreating him, but everybody at the table, all of the guests, Uncle Pumberchook, everybody but Joe is mistreating him and telling him how awful he is and how much of a burden he is. So this is Dickens again widening the loneliness trap, because now not only are his parents gone, his siblings and everybody else, now it's the neighbors that hate him. and everybody else that can't stand this kid. So why is Dickens working so hard to make this kid completely in abject poverty and loneliness and everything else? Does it make you want to root for him? Are you hoping that he figures this stuff out, or you do not care about this kid yet?
I think it's setting him up to be almost desperate for a normal, loving relationship. I mean, he does have that with Joe to a degree, but yeah, we just see this struggle. He doesn't know what it's like to have a fully loving relationship, because even the parts with Joe are done in secret, like the gravy and the notes, and everything has to be done in secret, almost like it's shameful.
Oh, I love that. I had thought about the secrecy part, but I never thought about the shame aspect of it. Like, isn't that a shame that they have to express love, in a shameful way, that they're being punished for expressing love? I liked one of my favorite parts of these first 70 pages, where when Pip is talking about how nobody loves him and he's not really that caring about anybody else, but he loves Joe unconditionally, mainly because Joe allows him to love him. I loved that. Like, Pip wants to love somebody. He wants to, it's not, for Pip, it's not so important that he feels loved. He wants to give love, and Joe's the only person that will let him give love. And so that's why Joe is so important to him. I thought that was interesting.
It's like, in a sense, for me, at the dinner table through that exchange, when they were lecturing him about gratitude, and it came across to me like he could never meet Mrs. Joe's expectations ever. No matter what he did, he would never ever meet those expectations. And so in essence, he was treated as an ungrateful person for everything that she's done for him, when in essence, I never took to believe that he was ungrateful. He was just never given the opportunity to show gratitude. And so, I think in that essence, it just showed that, the idea that he would never meet her expectations or any of the high society people that were there that night, the clerk and the other people that were there. He would never meet their expectations, and that he was just ungrateful.
I have found, with 4 kids, a couple teenagers. Teenagers are quite the challenge in many ways. I had one son in particular, I love him to death, but I love him because I've been through hell with him. This kid decided to really push those teenage buttons. And for a couple of years there, we were really struggling as a family. And I don't mean to be super raw at the moment, but I think this is important, because when you read, it reminds you of yourself, and the goal is to try and improve, right? So, but it makes me think about how for a couple of years there, as a father, I had no answers. And so, well, there was a lot of yelling in our home, a lot of it. And I'm ashamed to say that, but like, we just didn't know how to deal with this constant chaos. And then I remember one night, like, I just broke, and I just like gave my son a hug and decided to like unconditionally love him. And he has like gotten so much better over the past year and a half. Grades have gone from F's to A's and B's. He joined marching band and is just like a top student. He's just such a good kid now, and he's got his nose clean. He got his hair cut. He's looking all good, But it's just this powerful thing. I think when you love another human being, that makes them want to be better. That's the change factor. But when you have conditional expectations for people, especially unreasonable ones, it's like strangling that person sometimes. I don't know. So, wow. Okay, I wasn't expecting to share that. That was fun. Okay, so let's move on. Or start crying. He's a good kid. Okay, let's see. We did number 7. So, okay, number 8, I wrote, Pip is talking about a time he wrote a letter to Joe in jumbled words. Do you guys remember that letter he wrote? And the words were all hilly and you couldn't really read it. But Joe had never gone to school. Both are uneducated at this point, but the narrator, the old Pip, uses words, oh, I already talked about this, sagacious and stuff. What does this tell us about his education that he received in life? Let's skip that one because we already talked about it. So let's go to, okay. 9 is a big one. So Pip is talking about how cold it is outside at the marsh, in the marshes at night. And he says, and then I looked up at the stars and considered how awful it would be for a man to turn his face up to them as he froze to death and see no help or pity in all the glittering multitude. What does he mean here? Is Pip an atheist? What's his sort of sense on life? You know, this is a bit more of the philosophical point in life, but we have an 8-year-old who's having these thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it quite that way, which I should have, but I think I just kept thinking of what we'd been talking about, that his sense of safety is almost non-existent. And his sense of what you guys are saying, being loved unconditionally, again, almost non-existent. Everything is survival mode, and you can even see it in his imagination, just pretty darn bleak, as Tracy was mentioning.
Yeah.
And he's almost an orphan. And so, yeah, even looking up at nature and just feeling like, geez, this is tough.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about these remarks? These feelings Pip's having?
Doesn't he talk about at one point when he's reading the tombstones, when they reference family above or below, that's his view of the difference between a good person and a bad person, and kind of like the idea between heaven and hell, and who he would associate with and who he doesn't. I think it kind of sheds a little bit of light on his, I think he calls it catechism or Catholicism. I don't remember exactly that part of it, but where he does reference that when he reads that's how he interprets the tombstone.
Yeah, I love that.
To read that's how they, that's how they intended him to read those, or anyone to read those.
Yeah, that's a really good catch. I forgot that he had said that, and you're right. So Pip definitely has a sense or a belief in something here or after, and it's tied to his actions. I think this phrase in this moment where he's just opening up and being really raw, I think he's just, I don't know, what do y'all think? Just feeling super alone, super scared, super tired, like I am like struggling here. What do y'all think?
Yeah, this to me was just a profound sense of loneliness, and the way that he's really been made to feel worthless by everyone but Joe.
Yeah.
The neighbors, the sister, he's not just a burden, he's worthless.
Yeah.
No one would care if he died.
Yeah. Well, I actually think they'd be happy if he died. A lot of these people would be, right? The burden is gone. I can take my apron off. Miss Joe could relax and stop taking care of him or whatever, right? He's such a pain for her. Yeah. And I think he feels that, like, I think he thinks most of these people would rather him not be here. So. That's a happy book, people. Who chose this? I actually do think I actually really like it. I like the, here's what I like in this, right? It's, although it is bleak and scary and lonely, it's right now being told from the ideas, or from the eyes of a 7-year-old child, which I feel like most kids, even when they're squashed and beaten, still have that childlike sense about them, right? And they're just beautiful. And so I think the thing that kind of keeps me reading is like I'm rooting for Pip, hoping that he can like realize a beautiful life at some point, which would be really cool to see, that idea. Okay, so let's see here. Number 10. So now he's been asked this really weird thing, right? He's been asked Uncle Pumblechook is renting from Miss Havisham, who's this very well-known, high-end, wealthy woman in the town, and she has asked for somebody to come play at her house, which is a really weird request for an old lady to make. But Pip is nominated, and he gets all scrubbed up and cleaned up and put in his best clothes, and he gets sent on his way. And so when he's actually at this crazy house, which, did you guys catch the name of the house? Sadie's house? Do you remember why it was called Sadie's house?
Doesn't it mean enough?
Yeah, the enough house, right? Sadie's house. So the idea being that whoever has this house has enough, right? Like, you're good, you're taken care of. So this is definitely not a small cottage. It is kind of big and dark and gloomy, and a few other things. But okay, so when he finally gets there, Pip's left at the door of Miss Havisham by this girl. We know her name is Estella later on, right? The girl with the candle. And he's standing alone in the dark. And I'm just curious to know, I just thought that was a really powerful metaphor, because again, we've now taken this boy and we've put him in a completely strange situation, and he's in the dark. So he has no idea about what's about to happen. I just like that metaphor there. Any thought on this before we talk about Miss Havisham?
Well, again, I just thought it was sad that Estella, even with the candle, really wasn't the better option. Like, he still has no glimmer of hope. Even the candle in the holder of the candle, we're not. It's almost better for him to be alone in the dark in some sense.
Yeah, she's bringing light, right? She should be this child and this light in his life, and she should be answering questions and making him feel like a human being. But instead, even that goes away, and he's left in the dark, has no idea what's going on. I just loved that concept. And what a crazy lady, right? Like, people come visit her and you have to stand outside her door and talk to her. You can't go in, all this weird stuff. Anyway, all right, so he goes into Miss Havisham's room, and I would love to spend the next little bit talking about Miss Havisham. So I wrote in my notes here, number 11, how does Miss Havisham make you feel knowing that she is stuck in time and has never moved on? How can you apply this to your own personal life? In what ways are you stuck and clinging to the past? And nobody has to share their, stuck areas of life, but it is a good thing to think about. So what do you think about Miss Havisham? What are your impressions here?
Where to start with Miss Havisham?
Yeah.
My goodness. The play on the title, with her being stuck and everything being described as bridal. Clearly her expectations not being met, not being fulfilled, have frozen her in time.
Mm-hmm.
She makes a reference to not having seen the sun for as long as Pip's been alive, which we know to be about 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
She's gone to enormous lengths to make sure nobody gets into the space, and not even light gets into this space.
Oh.
And somehow the detail with things like the stocking on the foot where the shoe is missing, and how Pip knows that stocking is tattered, and the way everything was once white, and kind of in the beginning it makes it sound like he's not recognizing it as other than white, and then very quickly he starts talking about it being yellowed with age. He talks about understanding that the dress would have fit her when she had a younger woman's body, and how now it doesn't hang properly, and she's all angles, and it's eerie, it's creepy, it's unspeakably sad, and there's something twisted. There's something very twisted about saying, I want some strange child in this room playing to entertain me.
Yeah, Tracy, I had the similar feelings, of course. It's so interesting to think that the adults, particularly these, what would in other settings and other stories be maternal figures, are quite psychologically wrestling with us, the reader, of geez, his sister's treating him like this, and then he's being pulled into this other setting where another woman, a mother figure, but I assume probably lost her child or whatever's happened, and now he's going to be her entertainment, and it is super creepy the way she speaks to him, and yeah, weird.
Yeah. Give me a few other thoughts on Miss Havisham. Any other ideas here? How did she make you feel?
I thought it was weird. Maybe I'm jumping ahead too, but how she kept asking him, like, anything else? Anything else that is there any other reason why you would like to see the girl again or something like that? Does that ring a bell for anyone? And she just kept prodding for that answer. What else? What else? Why else?
Yeah.
It was just odd.
Yeah. Well, and we know she's stuck, right? Because she mentions that her heart was broken. So she clearly was getting ready for her wedding and had a tragedy. And we won't go into what that happened, what tragedy that is, because we'll read about it later. But she didn't take it well, did she? She didn't take that event well. And I think it's this very stark picture of what we as humans do sometimes when we have something awful happen to us, right? We shut down, we clam up, we hold tight, we wish things could be the way they were. We're not willing to change, learn, or grow. We blame the rest of the world for everything instead of like moving on. I know in my own personal life, going forward, when I do that, I'm going to tell myself, stop being such a Miss Havisham, right? Let it go. Let's just move forward. It's a good role model not to have, I think, Miss Havisham. I also loved the detail in this scene. I think that's what makes Miss Havisham so great, is because of all these really creepy, eerie details. You can see this old lady just sitting kind of sideways in her chair with this nasty white dress, right? And the veil and the whole thing. She just gives you the creeps.
Yeah, I feel the same way in the sense that he just does a magnificent job of painting these pictures where if you close your eyes, you can almost envision what he's seeing, what Pip's seeing, or what he's experiencing. Same way that he described the Hulk, same way that he's described other parts of the book or where he's been at. I close my eyes and that's what I see. I can see that. It's just, to me, that's a very, it's just a very good job of drawing the reader in to the actual environment where you feel like you're actually there, in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I know my whole living room went away, and I felt like I was in this creepy old room with this lady. I had to shut the book for a minute and be like, okay, it's not real. Tracy, did you have something?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about how this is a book about class and maybe even social climbing. There's something about Miss Havisham's wealth and her social status that means she has the luxury of wallowing in this despair and still having this, incredible reputation where everybody wants to please her instead of saying she's eccentric, she's crazy, she's dangerous. Like, we don't know, but she's certainly not living a normal existence. And it passes through to Estella as well. She's just plain mean. She's 7 or 8 years old. Pip's saying, they should be, on fairly equal footing as far as certain, aspects. And instead, she makes him feel like, oh, I wish I didn't have coarse hands, and I wish I knew the proper names for these cards, and I wish I was educated. So she's very much got a privilege in being stuck, as awful as it is, because, like you were saying, there's no human being who hasn't at some point been stuck, who hasn't had some kind of tragedy that they could not see their way past. But most of us don't actually have the ability to, particularly at this level, give into that. We have to, figure out how we're going to pay the mortgage or feed the kids or get things done. And eventually we're moving past whether we wanted to or not. And she's most definitely not.
Most definitely. Yeah. Well, even to the point where she's wearing one shoe and not the other one. The other one is never, because clearly at the moment tragedy struck, she was putting her shoes on, right? One foot in, one foot out. So she spent 8 years like hobbling around, clunk, 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 as she walks, right? Like she's so stubborn that she won't change anything. All of the clocks have been stopped at the exact moment this tragedy happened. Everything is set to keep her in her misery. And she has the wealth to allow her to do that, to be self-pitying. So you're right. We have complete ends of the spectrum right now, don't we? Complete poverty and complete selfish wealth. And so Pip is being exposed to this for the first time. And I think the most powerful part of the first 70 pages is when Pip, for the first time, realizes that he's poor, that he is a lower social status. Because up to that point, he's a 7-year-old who's just trying to get through life. Everybody lives like me. Life's hard. Here we go. He goes into this big fancy house. And like you said, Tracy, Stella tells him he's got rough hands, like tradesman's hands. That's gross. And his boots are really thick. Like, who has thick boots? Ooh, that's gross, you know? And his vernacular is uneducated. And so Pip realizes, I don't fit in. Not only am I lonely and everybody's dead, but I am like, I'm not very good. You know, I'm not, I don't know what the right thing is here, but like, yeah. Have you ever been into somebody's house that's like really wealthy and you're like, I don't belong here. This is like you're kind of fascinated, but you're like, I got to get out of this house. I'm gonna get mud on something. I don't know what it is, but it made me love Pip even more when he goes out to the courtyard after speaking with Miss Havisham, and he kind of hides behind the bush and he's banging his head against the wall and pulling at his hair because he realizes for the first time he has coarse hands, that his clothes aren't very good. He's realizing that he's of a low social stature. You know? I grew up in a poor family, and I never realized we were poor. But one day you realize, wow, we had no money. Like, I had no idea. You know, we had no money. I don't know if that's something any of you can relate to, but when you realize where you're at in society, and all of a sudden you are old enough to compare yourself to others, it's kind of it's a little unsettling, to be honest. Any other thoughts on this? Pip's exposure to society for the first time? I'm gonna ask you a question right now. I always like to ask questions, like when we read books, we don't just read books because they're fun. We read books to actually make some changes in our personal lives, right? And to do some self-reflection and do some journaling. Steve asked me last week, hey, I get how we take notes on nonfiction books. We annotate and we highlight and all that other stuff. What do we do with fiction books? Are we supposed to be highlighting in this thing? Are we supposed to be writing in this thing? I just want to quickly summarize what I told Steve, since we're through our notes for Great Expectations so far. But before I do that, I just want to open the floor before I talk about note-taking in a fiction book. Does anybody have anything else they want to say on the first 70 pages? Any other impressions you had, thoughts, feelings, ideas?
I had one thing that I wanted to bring up. When Pip is being bathed in preparation to meet Miss Havisham, he makes a comment about how rough it is and how he had not anticipated that his sister's wedding band would tear him up. And I'm wondering if we're going to get some commentary on marriage other than Mr. and Mrs. Joe, just kind of as a foreshadowing, because it's a really interesting point to make that this 7-year-old is like, darn, that ring just kept hurting me.
Well, and isn't it interesting that we were exposed to that idea of the ring being rubbed on his head because it hurts at the same time he meets Estella? So is there foreshadowing? Will there be a relationship there? Will Estella soften? What will make Estella like him? So those are things to consider. But clearly Estella and Pip are going to have more contact, right? Because he's going back to play. And we're going to see what's going to happen with these two.
Thank you for that, Tracy, and everyone. All those comments were awesome. And there's one passage that made me laugh, and now it's also made me think quite a bit. And it's back on page 17 or a little bit into 16, back when they were talking about the Hulks and he had stolen stuff. A little bit later in the passage, he talks about, I think he's saying he's imagining the cows yelling out that he's a thief and so forth. But he actually says, it makes me think of external and internal locus of control, but not necessarily saying that internal is better or external is better. But anyway, at the top of 17, he's saying, the mist was heavier yet when I got out upon the marshes, so that instead of my running at everything, everything seemed to run at me. This was very disagreeable to a guilty mind. The gates and the dikes and banks came bursting at me through the midst, as if they cried as plainly as can be, a boy with somebody else's pork pie. Stop him. So that last part made me smile, like stuff's yelling, hey, this is a little thief. But also that weird difference about, I guess I keep saying survival mode, but the world coming at me. And later I might carve my own path and go at the world, but me personally, perhaps neither is better. And sometimes there's advantages in being in both of those modes, taking what the world throws at us and figuring out how to respond. But other times, that being very disagreeable and figuring out how I can influence the world. Or just stuff yelling, hey, he stole someone's pork pie. It's kind of cool.
In case you're all wondering, I count to 7. If nobody says anything by 7, I talk. It's great. I love silence. I think there needs to be time to think. So I hope it doesn't make you feel uncomfortable that I just sit here quietly. But I think it's good for us. Okay. Well, the hour is up. Book club always lasts an hour. Now, as always, I stick around for 15 or 30 minutes longer just to chat about life or note-taking or highlightish or whatever you have questions about. I just think having a community is so important to people that are like-minded that you can talk to about books you love and concepts you love. So that's what the next chunk of time's for. But if you got to go, I appreciate it. Just give us a wave or sign off, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Tracy. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, again, go to highlightish.com and click on book club at the top. It's just $4.99 a month to join. And to give you a sense of what we're going to be reading in the future, coming up next, I believe, is Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. This is an incredible narrative of why people should all have the equal opportunity to create, regardless of gender, regardless of opportunity. We all should be able to exercise our creative powers. The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. This looks at our psychological viewpoint of why we feel anxious and why we are trying so hard to make ourselves, live a life of legacy and leave something behind when we die. And also, obviously, why we're scared of death and how we interface with that. It's a really good, really insightful book. Another example of what we'll be reading in book club this year is Michel de Montaigne's essays, one in particular on friendship. I picked that because I feel like our society has gotten so socially connected online, but in physical presence, we're all feeling a little lonely. We're just not getting together enough. And I thought reading a great essay on friendship would help you reanalyze the important friendships in your life and get those connections up and running again. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.